morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is William Pisarski. I'm president of the Hasbro Plastic Foundation, and I'm very happy to have you here, in particular on the eve of the NATO summit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you warmly at the NATO Ballistic Missile Defense Conference. I warmly welcome our distinguished guests from Poland, but particularly those who took effort and traveled to Warsaw from abroad. Among our guest speakers, we have representatives of Taiwan, United States, Germany, and Israel. I would like to say thank you to our honorary patrons, and particularly National Security Bureau of the President of Poland for its continuous support. Today's conference wouldn't be possible without generous support of our sponsors, Raytheon and Kongsberg. Thank you very much for your help. As we are living in a time of when information is power, it's also important to have media partners. And therefore I would like to say thank you to Defense 24, as well as New Military Technique magazine and Security and Defense magazine. We meet today in Warsaw on the eve of the NATO summit, and we hope that this conference will serve as the ideal opportunity for delegates to discuss, exchange, and clarify some of the most important items on NATO's ballistic missile defense. For us in Poland, NATO's arrival in Warsaw is particularly satisfying, since we had a doubtful honor of having the equivalent Soviet arrangement named after our capital, despite the fact that it was neither decided in Warsaw, nor packed, nor designed to defend us. The Aegis ballistic missile system that is going to be deployed in Poland is of reduced size and therefore will have no potential to modify the current strategic balance in Europe. This is strictly a defensive system. By definition, it is not directed against someone. Therefore, Russian threats of military countermeasures towards EPAA elements are unacceptable, unjustified, and irresponsible. They are aimed at intimidation and do not help confidence building. Geography and physics make it impossible for the NATO system to shoot down Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles from our missile defense sites in Poland or Romania. Russia knows it. Russia's claims are not backed up by facts. We should not have illusions. Russia's long-term attitude indicates that it will implement measures regardless whether or not we build the BMD system. Not only that any concessions would not change Russian policy nor action, but would be perceived as weakness. It is our weakness that encourages Russia to take assertive or aggressive steps. Our response to Russia should be a credible nature. Defense and deterrence both should. Therefore, Warsaw Summit should show a strong and united alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to NATO Ballistic Missile Defense. Sorry for this very serious tone, but I think if we are not, as a think tank community, able to speak directly and straightforward, who is able to do that? Well, I would like to ask our wonderful panelists to join me for the first panel. I would like to invite to the podium General Patrick O'Reilly. General, are you with us? Please come to the podium. General Patrick O'Reilly is a former director of the U.S. Missile Defense Agency, and he's also a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council of the United States. And he was the man who had a hard task to deliver to Poland information about cancellation of the fourth phase of EPAA. So, good to have you here with us. I would like to invite to the podium General Frederick Blogger. General Plodder is the former deputy commander of NATO's Allied Air Command in Ramstein, Germany. Glad to have you here with us, sir. I would like to invite to the podium Glenn Howard, president of Jamestown Foundation of the United States. Glenn. And I would like to invite to the podium our senior fellow of Ballistic Foundation, our good friend, General Professor Stanislav Kozic, head of National Security Bureau 2010-2015. Let me move to our wonderful panelists. No worries, it is nothing that serious, because last month, when we had conference about Ballistic Baltic Sea security, suddenly, when we started talking about Russia, well, electricity went down. And then the owners of the hotel were unable to explain how it happened, for the first time it happened. So we have for today candles, just in case, and we'll be speaking loudly if it will be needed, but believe me, we'll pursue this conference successfully. But on a serious note, let me begin our first panel, which is aiming to respond to a pretty general question about NATO ballistic missile and why do we need it. I will ask several questions to our panelists, and then I will yield the floor to our wonderful and competent public. So please start thinking about painful, cruel questions that you would like to ask to our wonderful and competent guests, as we would like to be a platform for discussion, honest discussion. So maybe let's start with a question to General O'Reilly. Sir, you have been director of the U.S. Missile Defense Agency when President Obama counseled President Bush's plan of anti-ballistic missile shield in Eastern Europe and ordered instead the development of a reconfigured system designed to shut down short and medium-range Iranian missiles. Could you share with us some insight why this decision was taken, and do you think that President Obama should regret it today?
Actually, first of all, no, I don't think President Obama should regret his decision. I believe what is key to the involvement of... Can you hear? Okay. First of all, I believe what is key to the phased adaptive approach, which was put forth in 2009, and I was involved in both the previous program project here and the current one, is the adaptability. That is a key trait which didn't exist in the previous system. And by adaptability, I not only mean the focus of a ballistic missile defense system in NATO, and at the time it was Iran was a major concern for intermediate range missiles, but the adaptability has proven to be very helpful in the fact that the threat has evolved. And I know we have other speakers today, like Mr. Rubin, that will discuss the evolving threat. But having been involved in the development of these systems and negotiations here in Romania and other places, we did not conceive at the time ISIL threat, extremist threats, the Syrian war, conflict in Ukraine. All of these have emerged since our initial discussions occurred, and for me it was back in 2005, actually under President Bush. So over the history of time, it has shown already that what is extremely important is adaptability, and to have a system that is not only adaptable in terms of orientation of the direction of the threat, but also in depth of the coverage. In other words, it needs to be integrated with intelligence systems, cyber defense, air defense, and the other elements of NATO's defense. A lot of work has occurred. It may not be as apparent as a missile test, but a lot of work, good work has emerged over time in the integration of the command and control. And I believe the future growth, to have a robust missile defense, which will affect the behavior of potential adversaries and threats, again, that 10 years from now we probably are not discussing today or even imagining today, is the key to that is to have a robust defense where low-level missile threats are completely eliminated. And the only threat and intimidation that could occur would be intimidation by a very large raid size. And that is very difficult for a country to prosecute or to threaten through a proxy or through claims that it's a terrorist or some other surrogate organization. And so I think the original decision by President Bush to have a large contribution to NATO missile defense has proven to be wise. I believe that President Obama's adjustment so that it's more adaptable to future and uncertain threats, but it's also proven to be wise.
One. You said about wise decisions, so maybe I will ask about the style. Sorry to be. Do you think it was very wise to deliver this message on the anniversary of Russian attack on Poland on the 17th of September?
Having been personally involved in the decision with the announcement, there was a lot of discussion going on at the time, to be quite honest, about the counter dialogue that was occurring in Russia that was misrepresenting what this announcement was about. And there was a extreme urgency to make the announcement as soon as possible. And we were very concerned at the time, to be honest, that Russia was going to manipulate the announcement to be different than it was. And because of that urgency, the date wasn't considered. That historical application, I believe, was a mistake. We shouldn't have made it on that day. But in all honesty, it was realized after the fact. The first consideration and the second, having been involved in the process, was watching what the message that was coming out and the gross misinterpretation of the facts that was occurring primarily by Russia. And that drove the announcement to occur as soon as possible. I regret and do not believe that we should have made it on that date, but it was not part of the original or even the final rationale of why it was announced when it was.
Thank you very much. I will not be that brutal anymore, so thank you very much, General. And let me ask a question to Professor Kozik, and I would like to ask it in Polish, so international colleagues equip yourself with some translation equipment. Panie Generale, to Pan, będąc szefem Biura Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego, przyczynił się do podjęcia prac nad programem Wisła i Narew na Pańskiej zmianie. Ten program został zainicjowany. Jakie były wówczas wyzwania, którymi miała ta tarcza się zająć, którymi miała ta tarcza sprostać? I czy zaszły w tym zakresie jakieś istotne zmiany? Oraz jak Pan ocenia realizację programu Wisła Narew z perspektywy obserwatora już z zewnątrz, z tą swobodą, że tak powiem, komentatora w kontekście ostatnich chociażby wypowiedzi ministra obrony narodowej? Pani.
Bardzo dziękuję. Przesłanki, którymi się kierowaliśmy w Polsce, podejmując wyzwanie zbudowania obrony przeciwrakietowej, można podzielić co najmniej na takie 2-3 grupy. Pierwsza to są przesłanki czysto operacyjne. wynikające z analizy współczesnego pola walki, z faktu, że w dzisiejszych czasach głównym nośnikiem siły uderzeniowej w ogóle na lądzie, w powietrzu, na morzu są rakiety. I ten, kto nie ma zdolności zwalczania tych rakiet, obrony przed nimi, walki z rakietami, to w istocie rzeczy nie ma szans, równych szans w walce zbrojnej. Będzie zawsze na przegranej pozycji. Stąd też budowanie obrony przeciwrakietowej w Polsce uznaliśmy za priorytetowe zadanie. To była pierwsza przesłanka, taka bym powiedział, najbardziej oczywista, operacyjna, oznaczająca konieczność sprostania tym nowoczesnym wyzwaniom pola walki. Druga przesłanka ma charakter polityczno-strategiczny, bym powiedział. Otóż praktyka pokazuje, że te rakiety, one są wykorzystywane także na co dzień, do szantażowania, do straszenia, do prowadzenia tej coercive policy, czyli takiej polityki nacisku, presji, szantażu. Obserwujemy to bardzo, takim klasycznym przykładem jest Korea chociażby Północna, której główna siła polityczna zasadza się na straszeniu rakietami swoimi. Słyszymy często od naszego sąsiada rosyjskiego, który co jakiś czas przy każdej najbardziej dla niego potrzebnej sytuacji odwołuje się do tych rakiet, do Iskanderów, że przenosi, że wycelowuje i tak dalej, i tak dalej. No jednym słowem, rakiety są dzisiaj także instrumentem bieżącej polityki, bieżącej presji. I państwo, które nie ma zdolności neutralizowania tej presji, to znaczy nie ma obrony przed tymi rakietami, no jest z góry skazane na słabszą pozycję w tej bieżącej konfrontacji. A ponieważ dla nas to straszenie rosyjskie rakietami dla opinii publicznej w Polsce jest istotne, ponieważ Rosjanie bardzo często do tego się uciekają, w związku z tym ta potrzeba jakby uodpornienia polityczno-strategicznego, uodpornienia Polski na politykę szantażu rakietowego była też ważnym czynnikiem przesądzającym o tym, że powinniśmy budować swoją obronę przeciwrakietową, aby być odpornym bardziej na tego typu zagrożenia. Do tych argumentów dodałbym jeszcze jeden, moim zdaniem bardzo istotny, może nie konkretnie do Polski się tylko odnoszący, ale szerzej do całego Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego. A mianowicie rakiety dzielą NATO na największym uproszczeniu, można powiedzieć, na dwie strefy. Ten szantaż, o którym przed chwilą mówiłem, jest łatwiejszy dla państw, które znajdują się w strefie zasięgu tych rakiet rosyjskich, na przykład Iskanderów, prawda? Natomiast inne państwa, które nie są w zasięgu tych rakiet, które trudniej rakietami dosięgnąć, nie odczuwają tej presji. W ten sposób niejako rakiety swoim zasięgiem oddziaływania mogą dzielić strefę, jednolitą strefę bezpieczeństwa Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego na dwie części. Tę, która jest mocniej narażona na rakiety i tę, która jest słabiej narażona. No to jest oczywiście niedobra sytuacja, to jest negatywny czynnik utrudniający uzyskiwanie konsensusu wewnątrz NATO, bo zupełnie inaczej podchodzą te państwa, które czują się zagrożone, inaczej, które nie. W związku z tym ten konsensus, nawet jeśli osiągamy, to jest po jakichś dłuższych deliberacjach i na jakimś niższym poziomie. W związku z tym budowanie systemu obrony przeciwrakietowej NATO jest z tego punktu widzenia, moim zdaniem, niezmiernie ważnym czynnikiem ułatwiającym spójność, spoistość, jednolitość działania Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego. W związku z tym my jesteśmy bardzo mocno zainteresowani, nieprzypadkowo, z tego chociażby względu Polska jest bardzo mocno zainteresowana budową sojuszniczego natowskiego systemu obrony przeciwrakietowej, bo to jest ten instrument, który pozwala nam no, jakby wyrównywać poziom bezpieczeństwa w całym NATO i tym samym wzmacniać poczucie polskiego bezpieczeństwa. Stąd też nasze decyzje o budowie własnego systemu obrony przeciwrakietowej wpisują się właśnie w to natowski wysiłek budowania obrony przeciwrakietowej. Jesteśmy bardzo zainteresowani. I na koniec jeszcze jeden element bym dodał, taki element amerykański. Otóż ta obrona przeciwrakietowa i w ogóle system obrony przeciwrakietowej, w ogóle mówienie, dyskusje, nie mówiąc już o budowaniu systemu obrony przeciwrakietowej sojuszniczego, jest jednym z ważnych elementów wzmacniania tych więzi transatlantyckich Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego. Dlatego, że akurat tak się składa, że Stany Zjednoczone mają swój interes strategiczny w budowaniu czy w instalowaniu swoich obiektów infrastruktury obrony przeciwrakietowej w Europie, w niektórych państwach, no na przykład tak jak w Polsce, prawda? Akurat jest tutaj zbieżność interesów strategicznych amerykańskiego, polskiego i ogólnosojuszniczego. Więc istnieje bardzo dobra możliwość, ta problematyka obrony przeciwrakietowej jest dobrą materią, bym powiedział, do wzmacniania tego, co dla NATO jest chyba najważniejsze, a mianowicie ścisłych więzi transatlantyckich między Stanami Zjednoczonymi i Europą, nie mówiąc już o jakimś szczególnie jeszcze dodatkowej wadze dla takich krajów jak Polska czy Rumunia, gdzie te obiekty amerykańskie już są budowane. Dziękuję bardzo.
Nie, panie ministrze, tak łatwo mi pan nie ucieknie. To już chyba druga część pytania. Jak pan ocenia realizację programu Wisła i nawet chociażby w kontekście ostatnich wypowiedzi ministra o wyłonieniu firmy Raytheon do prowadzenia dalszych rozmów?
No, obecny minister obrony narodowej niezbyt chętnie przyznaje się do kontynuacji. Powiedział w ogóle takiej filozofii kontynuacyjnej. A tymczasem akurat w tej problematyce okazuje się, że jest ta kontynuacja. Trochę szkoda, że ta kontynuacja była przerwana wielomiesięcznym takim okresem. Ja z jednej strony to rozumiem, że przychodzi nowa władza, nowy rząd, nowy minister, nowy prezydent, nowy, że wymienię szefa biura, nowy szef Biura Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego. Przychodzi nowa ekipa i chce się przyjrzeć jakby tym wszystkim decyzjom poprzedników. To jest jakiś proces naturalny. Może my jesteśmy tu w Polsce trochę przewrażliwieni, nie wiem, że takie przeglądy są, że takie refleksje są, ale wydaje mi się, że one jednak trochę za długo trwały. Dobrze, że teraz pojawił się jakiś element przyspieszenia w postaci porozumienia między firmami w to potencjalnie zaangażowanymi. No ale przypomnę, że te ostatnie decyzje, czy ostatnie, może to nie są jeszcze przecież finalne decyzje, ale jakby te kierunkowe decyzje są kontynuacją tego, co rok temu zostało ogłoszone przez poprzednią ekipę rządową, przez poprzedniego prezydenta. Mam nadzieję, że ten program, że realizacja tego programu nabierze tempa, przyspieszenia, ponieważ no, jest to sprawa niezmiernie pilna i jednocześnie wymagająca jednak czasu w realizacji. Więc decyzja jest jak najbardziej potrzebna. Ja myślę, że gdyby było trochę więcej takiej u nas kultury strategicznej, czy polityczno-strategicznej dotyczącej konsensusu w tych podstawowych sprawach, jakimi jest bezpieczeństwo narodowe, to nie trzeba by było tak długo czekać na tę decyzję. Można by byłoby już to wcześniej zrobić i nie stracić tego co najmniej jednego roku. Jeden rok został moim zdaniem już niestety stracony. Ale dobrze, że ta ekipa kontynuuje ten priorytet, bo przypomnę, że obrona przeciwrakietowa została ustanowiona jako pierwszy, najważniejszy priorytet strategiczny, jeśli idzie o modernizację polskich sił zbrojnych, jeśli idzie w ogóle o rozwój polskiego systemu bezpieczeństwa narodowego.
Dziękuję. Muszę dodać gwoli sprawiedliwości, że współpraca chociażby pomiędzy Fundacją Puławskiego a Biurem Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego jest nie tylko kontynuowana, ale nawet dzisiejsze spotkanie jest patronatem pana ministra Soloka.
Czyli też kontynuacja.
Jest tutaj, kontynuacja.
Tak.
Zresztą to samo pan minister Solok powiedział, Państwo też byliście część Państwa na Warsaw Security Forum. Ta współpraca pomiędzy nami jest kontynuowana. Innymi słowy, to było pewnego rodzaju uznanie dla dorobku pana ministra Koziela. Ale przechodząc do kolejnego pytania. It will be a question to Glenn. Glenn, it looks like only you and me are not the former generals. Well, so I assume that we should have aspirations at least as ministers of defense. Do you agree? I know that you have good relations with Republicans, so if they will win, you will be on the American side. But seriously, you are president of Jamestown Foundation, which is specializing in analyzing possible states. In Poland, exactly like Mr. Kozi mentioned, each time we talk about missile defense, Russian representatives are threatening us with retargeting, repositioning the nukes and so on, missiles against European cities, capitals. Based on your experience in interpreting Russian intentions, could you help us to understand a bit what we can expect from Putin's Russia in this aspect? Myself, with my 7-year-old daughter, I had a chance to visit USS Donald Cook, IAG's part of IAG system that was visiting Poland, and just a day later, Russian Su-24 was flying 9 meters from this ship. So these are provocations, not aimed to decrease the level of tensions. How serious it is?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to be able to be here to speak today with the Ballistic Foundation and with distinguished also presenters, people speaking here today. I always look forward to a chance to come to Warsaw, and I think that with the Warsaw Summit coming, it's a very pivotal moment in Poland's history. It's a very pivotal moment for the NATO alliance as we now look at the eastern flank of NATO and Poland being in the forward defense position of NATO now in the east. And I think that all of your points about the Cook and the visit, what the implications are now is that unlike during the Cold War, you now have a leader of Russia, such as Putin, who's willing to undertake risks. The level of risk-taking by President Putin is quite high. And whether you look at it all the way from the Baltic to the Black Sea to Georgia, and even in the airstrikes in Syria, which were launched by the Caliber missiles in the Caspian, you see the whole periphery of Russia is changing and with the level of risk-taking. So I think that what's important in understanding this is that even during the Cold War, the idea of no first strike use by the Soviet Union is our definition of rules of behavior of what Russia abides by in its behavior is changing. Here we are with the Warsaw Summit, and last night over dinner we were talking about what happened during the Wales Summit. And if many of you remember, during the Wales Summit, on the eve of the Wales Summit, that was when President Obama left Estonia, and that was when the Russians reached across the border and kidnapped a NATO officer, Espen Kober, and kidnapped him and held him in Lubyanka prison for over a year. This was an element of risk-taking that is below the threshold of war, but it's a level where we define red lines for the Russians. They are redefining the lines in pink lines, or new rules of behavior that fall between outright war and conflict to the areas of what we define as hybrid warfare. So I think this is very important when we talk about the Cook, the buzzing of the Cook, and the level of flying within 30 feet of an American warship, and the level of risk-taking and the signaling that's been going on, because the whole idea behind the kidnapping of Korea during the Wales summit with the Estonian military officer was to show that NATO is unable to respond to these types of low-level threats and actions that are taken between these gray areas of war and conflict. And this is where the Russians, with the concept of nuclear de-escalation, the deployment of the Iskander missiles in Kaliningrad. One day they're in Kaliningrad, next day they're not. The guessing game that we play with the Iskanders in the modernization of the Russian military all along the eastern flank of NATO. Today, when we talk about the eastern flank of NATO, if you're talking to a Romanian, their definition of eastern flank is much different than talking to the Poles or the Lithuanians or the Estonians. In fact, they can't agree on what the definition is of the eastern flank. And so I think that the rules of behavior, even for the NATO and how it responds, is also changing. And our definition now needs to change with that, and it is changing with the Warsaw Summit. But we need to look at this region from a threat perception level of understanding that it goes, in the Polish concept of this is what they call the Mare Nostrum, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. There's another definition of this now, it's being called the Pontic Isthmus, which goes all the way from Poland to the Black Sea. That's another geopolitical concept that is coming. But the point is that this is a new defensive line. And then along this defensive line, that's stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, armies are modernizing, the needs are changing. The military of Poland has been modernizing. It's now with armored divisions are now, there's more German tanks in Polish army than there are in Germany, I've been told. So there's different things occurring even within Lithuania, where they're now adding a 30,000-man reserve force that is going to increase their requirements for high-altitude air defense. They have low-altitude air defense, but they don't have this now. They need high altitude. So the defense requirements of even Poland are also changing as well as it looks at air defense. And even the strategic concept of the United States and its forces, 30,000 men in Europe. During the Cold War, there were 300,000 ground troops, American ground troops in the Volga Gap. They had a supply line that stretched from Hamburg to the Volga Gap. Now our supply lines are not, they completely changed. You know, now to get, it will take American forces over a week to get to Poland or the Baltic if they have to be reinforced. Russia can put 50 anywhere on the borders, anywhere along the periphery of the Baltic, and this whole strategic axis to the Black Sea. They have that strategic convenience and conventional capabilities to do that, whereas NATO, with the very high Joint Readiness Task Force, the Spearhead Division, 5,000 men, General Scaparetti does not even have the authority to deploy it. And so these are the strategic challenges that NATO has now. As armies are modernizing, the Russians are now talking about 3 new military divisions in the Western Military District. And yet NATO does not even have the ability to detect when warships leave St. Petersburg for snap inspections anywhere in Kaliningrad. They can leave, and we don't have the capabilities to detect these movements. So even our strategic level of being able to understand what's happening is changing. The environment in which we added these countries as members of NATO, the East is changing. But so is the geopolitics. Countries like Belarus, which did not matter anything to the United States or to NATO, are suddenly becoming strategically more important because these are staging areas. These are important areas that should and remain free of Russian ground troops, but overnight it could change. Our strategic environment in the Baltic could change literally within hours. So many of these areas of the geopolitics of the region are changing. Countries like Belarus are becoming more important to NATO, not as an ally of NATO, but maybe as just de facto buffer zones between NATO and the Baltic and Poland. So with the meeting of the Warsaw Summit, our whole strategic environment is changing, and with that are changing the requirements.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I would like to move to our German friend, General Plogger. General, according to U.S. government, Russia is violating intermediate range nuclear force treaty, INF treaty. Let's for this question, put it, if it's true, is German missile defense ready to respond to potential missile threat from Russia?
Is it on now? Okay. Thank you for that question. First of all, let me thank you and the Ballistic organization to invite me here, for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak at this important forum. Secondly, I would like to underline that I'm a former German general officer. Yes, I'm not speaking for my country. I'm speaking from my experience as an officer working quite a long time in NATO, and from my experience I gained over 46 years of active service. Now to your question. Germany did not decide to build up an own ballistic missile defense capability because we thought it is necessary that we do it together with all the other allies within NATO. And that is why Germany fully subscribed to the Lisbon Summit and the approach to build up the ballistic missile defense system in the alliance. I should also remind you that the alliance was dealing with ballistic missile defense issues quite a long time before, under the old BMD program that was under discussion and under development since the early 2000s. And Germany contributed, like 6 other NATO nations, contributed to the old BMD capabilities with their Patriot systems. Now we heard that the security environment since the Lisbon Summit has changed. The NATO BMD system is, let's call it, one-dimensionally oriented against the Southwest Asian threat at the moment. And that is the idea behind the building up of the various phases of the European phased adaptive approach, with the Romanian system being operational now, and I think on Friday or Saturday NATO will declare initial operating capability for the BMD system against that threat. The situation has changed, we heard it, and what we lack is a capability that provides coverage against threatening ballistic missiles 360 degrees. We deployed Patriot systems into Turkey to defend Turkish territory against Syrian ballistic missiles. These Patriot batteries never needed to engage, thank God, but they were ready to engage missiles coming into Gaziantep, Karaman, Russia, Adana. And there are still systems out there defending Turkey. So the threat is growing. When we talk about the new challenge that Russia is posing us, we should not talk about Russia is trying to, I think they are trying to divide NATO, but we should not support that, let's say, that approach, that challenge by the Russians, and we should continue to stand together as an alliance. And that was underpinned already in Wales during the Wales Summit, with the creation of the VGTF and with quite a few actions that were put in motion to tell the Russians, if you want to move further, you are confronted with the whole NATO alliance, with the whole military and political power of the alliance, not with a single country. You are confronted with the whole power of the alliance. And I think Putin knows that. He knows that. And he is, with some moves, trying to, let's say, challenge countries that probably are, let's say, more vulnerable, but these countries should definitely believe in NATO and should definitely understand that NATO is standing at their side. And that goes through the whole NATO alliance. Like ballistic missile defense was an activity in which 28 nations, and is an activity in which 28 nations support 28 nations. The defense of NATO Europe is an activity in which all the 28 nations stand together, and that includes all countries, even Iceland, even though they don't have military capabilities. And when we look at the theater now, we have a lack of a standing ballistic missile defense capability in the northeastern portion of NATO Europe, as well as in the southeastern portion against threats coming directly from the east. That is good. But when you look at the plans that are developed, the most important part of the plans is that an air defense area will be established, in which then SACEUR acts as the responsible air defense commander. And that includes not only air policing and airborne fighters against an airborne threat, but also ground-based systems to be able to defend against air bracing as well as ballistic missile threats. And this is called then theater ballistic missile defense for the various plans. There are plans for the Baltics, there are plans for the defense of Poland, there are plans for the defense of Romania, and this is part of the plans. What NATO is lacking, that is true, is a capability in lower layer systems, because the few lower layer systems that are at the moment available in NATO Europe, are not enough to provide the cover that is required for the defense of a certain theater. So the only capable nations with ground-based air defense system in Europe are Germany, Netherlands with only 3, then a few French Samplici systems, a few Italians, and a few Spanish, and that's it. And then the Americans, but even the Americans, have scaled down their ground-based capabilities a lot in the lower layer area. What we need is a bolstering of the lower layer systems capability in NATO, and we should do it through collective defense planning, and the nations who provide those capabilities should remember to make these available for SACEUR to fulfill its mission. Integrate them into the NATO system so that NATO can act as, and SACEUR can act as he is tasked to do. That is a plea. I also said it in a conference in Turkey. If you want to buy lower layer systems, make sure that they are integrated, because with the integration, you gain the advantage of an overall picture. You get the pre-warning by sensors, etc., etc. So that is most important, integrated. And don't think that ballistic missile defense is a national thing. Ballistic missile defense has been and will be in the future always a multinational an activity in Europe that is undertaken by the Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General, for this strong statement. My next question is to General O'Reilly. General, United States have been pursuing DMD initiatives for many decades, in fact. In your opinion, how does the NATO ballistic missile system and its members that are voluntarily contributing its assets, like EPA in Poland or Wisla program in Poland, how these assets enhance the security of the United States? How important is early radar discrimination and forward-deployed sensors for effective DMD capabilities? And maybe I can even add you a specific issue. Do you think it would be possible or beneficial to place a radar such a TPY-2 in Poland?
Well, let me answer the first question first. Obviously, the strength of our alliance with NATO depends on Article 5 and the commitment that all members of NATO has and the confidence level. And so, number one, the importance to the United States is to show an active commitment, and there's no better way of showing an active commitment than literally deployment of forces to Article 5 of NATO, which binds us together and strengthens us overall. Number two is Europe is a very strategic point on the globe, obviously, for U.S. Defense, and we have invested for at least 70 years greater in building very key infrastructure here that we, although have greatly reduced the size of our footprint in Europe, we have not eliminated it. And those remaining capabilities are still extremely important, and we need to, we have vulnerable those capabilities to any missile threat to Europe. We're part of that vulnerability. So we need to strengthen, in fact, for our own protection of our own deployed assets, as well as re-emphasizing the importance of Article 5 and prepared to defend any aspect of NATO. So, or any place of NATO territory. Again, the third point is the ability to predict the threat in the future. I must emphasize that over and over again. 10 years ago, if we had this conference, we wouldn't talk about some of the leading threats that we see today. I would challenge anyone in this room to predict what we will be talking about in 2026 as threats to NATO. So we must be prepared. Missile defense systems, as well as the integration of missile defense systems, takes a very long period of time. Not only to develop and test, but also demonstrate in live fire testings and exercises to give us the confidence that we need to have a robust deterrence. So that investment needs to continue on to counter the uncertainty of the threat we see in the future. Those are primary reasons why the U.S. feels that this is so important and will, for the I can't imagine them not ever in the future not considering this a pivotal point of U.S. security in the region. Now, your second question was a tipsy 2 in, that's a very good question. I haven't been asked that one before, but I must say that when you look at how to make NATO ballistic missile defense more robust, besides ensuring that it's integrated with ACTS and the other command and control aspects, as General Fluger had just mentioned, is integrating our existing systems, our sensor systems that exist in the NATO member countries today. Not all of them are integrated into missile defense that could be. That's a very low cost, but very effective way of enhancing the depth. And as we talk about the adaptability of missile defense in Europe, key to that adaptability is not so much the placement of our launchers, but the placement of our sensors. And our sensor systems, like the TPSI-2, were designed to be highly mobile, very quickly set up, within hours if they have to be. So I think what's key is that flexibility. This would have a great vantage point in Poland, a TPSI-2. But what's even more important is the ability to reorient the TPSI-2 or adjust it if you have to. So when we were designing the basic architecture for missile defense, not only in Europe but in all theaters of the world, we took into account how quickly we could reorient and relocate sensor systems. And that involves, again, a very extensive, not only physical location, but also the integration and the command and control aspects of placing sensors in the different locations. And I think that's extremely important work that must continue.
Thank you, General. Thank you very much. And my next question will be to Mr. Koziel. Please put headphones if you need, or learn Polish very fast, which is not that easy. Panie profesorze, baza w Redzikowie jako część natowskiego systemu nie posiada jednej zdolności, a mianowicie nie posiada zdolności przeciwlotniczych, takich zdolności samoobrony potencjalnego zagrożenia chociażby lotniczego, na przykład z kierunku kaliningradzkiego. Czy powinna posiadać?
O, teraz działa. Tutaj wyłączył Pan. Ja sobie nie wyobrażam, żeby nie posiadała tej zdolności. No przecież nie mogłaby żyć w ogóle na współczesnym polu walki bez takiej osłony przeciwlotniczej także. W tym kontekście ja dostrzegam na przykład jakby spore pole do współpracy polsko-amerykańskiej w tym zakresie. Ta baza w Redzikowie to nie jest tylko czysty element, taki jednostronny element obrony przeciwrakietowej, ale to jest jednocześnie cały kompleks systemów, który stwarza jakby dodatkowe szanse tej współpracy także operacyjnej między Polską i Stanami Zjednoczonymi w tym przypadku. To jest także zadanie dla zintegrowanego systemu obrony powietrznej całego Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego, ale myślę, że tu, jeśli już rozmawiamy o kontekście Polski, my powinniśmy wykorzystać tę szansę do szukania różnych metod i sposobów współpracy wojskowej, w tym przypadku w zakresie obrony powietrznej, w kontekście bazy w Redzikowie. Aby taką współpracę oferować, to jednocześnie my musimy znowu u nas przyspieszyć, dynamizować modernizację, unowocześnienie własnego systemu obrony powietrznej, w tym także tego segmentu, jakim jest obrona przeciwlotnicza. Ja myślę, że również jakby zbudowanie naszego systemu obrony przeciwrakietowej, tego krótkiego zasięgu będzie mogło być zintegrowane w sensie operacyjnym z wykorzystaniem tej bazy w Redzikowie. No ale skoro już tutaj Pan wspomniał też o Kaliningradzie i o tej bliskim sąsiedztwie, w związku z tym jakby bliskim zagrożeniu dla Polski, dla struktur natowskich, w tym także tej amerykańskiej bazy, to myślę, że warto w tej naszej rozmowie być może jeszcze zastanowić się nad jeszcze jednym aspektem tej obrony przeciwrakietowej, a mianowicie ta obrona przeciwrakietowa, a rosyjska doktryna wykorzystania taktycznej broni nuklearnej. Mam na myśli doktrynę rosyjską tak zwanej deeskalacji nuklearnej, która najkrócej mówiąc, jak wszyscy tu wiemy na pewno na sali, polega na tym, że Rosjanie w razie konfliktu konwencjonalnego, który by nie przebiegał po ich myśli, gotowi są użyć taktycznej broni nuklearnej w takim uderzeniu ostrzegawczym, powstrzymującym, kończącym jakby ten konflikt, aby on nie rozwijał się niekorzystnie dla Rosji. I otóż ta doktryna deeskalacji nuklearnej przy pomocy taktycznej broni nuklearnej moim zdaniem jest na dzisiaj najważniejszym wyzwaniem, najpotężniejszym wyzwaniem dla Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego. To nie są tylko, to zagrożenie czy to wyzwanie dla NATO nie jest rzucane tylko przez nawet te masowe dywizje, które Rosja planuje rozwijać przy granicy NATO. A ta właśnie doktryna deeskalacji nuklearnej, dlatego że ona może bardzo poważnie, jeśli by Rosja uznała, że ta doktryna jest dla nich skuteczna, bardzo poważnie obniża poziom ryzyka dla Rosji rozpoczęcia ewentualnie jakiegoś konfliktu zbrojnego, zwłaszcza w odniesieniu do krajów bałtyckich. I na to my, jako Sojusz Północnoatlantycki, musimy znaleźć odpowiedź na tę doktrynę rosyjską. Jeśli znajdziemy skuteczną odpowiedź, to znaczy taką, która przekona decydentów rosyjskich, że ona jest skuteczna, że ta ich doktryna nie zadziała, to i ryzyko konfliktu zbrojnego znakomicie się zmniejszy. I ja bym podjął taki wątek dyskusji. Ciekawy jestem, co myślą. Przepraszam, że tak trochę w rolę przewodniczącego wchodzę.
Pan jest profesorem, ja ciągle jeszcze magistrem.
Nie wierzę.
Już niedługo.
Ale doktorat już jest zaawansowany. Co myślimy, czy obrona przeciwrakietowa NATO może odegrać jakąś rolę, jeśli tak, to jaką, na ile skuteczną w neutralizowaniu tej rosyjskiej doktryny deeskalacji nuklearnej przy pomocy taktycznej broni nuklearnej. Bo tu między innymi są Iskandery, przy pomocy których Rosja próbuje, czy przedstawia jakby możliwość zastosowania tej doktryny. Wydaje się, że jest tutaj spore miejsce do udziału obrony przeciwrakietowej w neutralizowaniu tej rosyjskiej doktryny. Oczywiście ona nie skasuje jej możliwości, jej potencjału, sama obrona przeciwrakietowa, ale ona może być istotnym elementem. I myślę, że w tej sojuszniczej odpowiedzi, którą nie wiem, czy na tym szczycie warszawskim, być może w ramach tego dyskusji na ten temat Sojusz Północnoatlantycki na pewno będzie szukał odpowiedzi na tę doktrynę, to czy obrona przeciwrakietowa może odegrać tutaj jakąś istotną rolę?
Pan generał, proszę. Sir.
What is it? Okay. In direct response to that question, first of all, I think there is an interpretation, translation mistake, because that doctrine the Russians are pursuing for quite a long time, because they needed the tactical moves all the time to compensate for conventional weaknesses. It is an escalation, not a de-escalation doctrine. It's an escalation because they escalate the war into a new dimension. When we look at possible activities countering that doctrine, deterrence comes into play. And deterrence consists basically of two elements. One is by denial, and ballistic missile defense systems could contribute to the denial, taking away options of the enemy to use ballistic missiles, nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, or ballistic missiles tipped with weapons of mass destruction, as we do with our current missile defense system defending against the threat coming from Southwest Asia. And when we have intelligence information, NATO has intelligence information that probably a missile is tipped with a warhead, with weapons of mass destruction or nuclear warhead, our firing doctrine will immediately change, and we will have all capabilities defending against that incoming missile, if that is the case. Okay. The other element is still the old famous deterrence by punishment. And we shouldn't refrain from, let's say, thinking about using tactical nukes in warfare. We should use the nukes in their deterrent capability and their strategic role. And that means we in NATO are linked together by the so-called extended deterrence provided by the nuclear powers in the alliance. And that is the US, number one. Great Britain, the UK, with their sea-based systems, and France, hopefully contributing at least adding to that deterrence capability. And NATO still has a strategic element called the dual capable capability that is available to underline that all NATO allies are within that umbrella of extended deterrence. So I think Putin knows that if he tries to go to tactical nukes the use of tactical nukes, the answer will not be a tactical nuke into Kaliningrad. The answer will be a different nuke into a different area, where he is hurt, not we are hurt.
Ooh. Thank you very much, General. Actually, you took your time for my second question I had to you, but the answer was better than my question, so I like it very much. I have one last question to Howard before we will yield the floor to the public. Howard, Glenn, could you give us some encouragement? What we can expect from the next president of the United States? And I don't say, is it he or she?
First of all, thank you for this great question. I just want to comment too on what Jurko said. I think that he has asked a very excellent question, and I think the answer to that is you counter doctrine with doctrine. And that in the 1980s, our doctrine was the idea of air-land battle. That was our response to ability to the Russian offensive potential in eastern Germany. And so we have to, nuclear de-escalation, we have to find out and develop our own doctrine of defense and articulate that in a way that it's a unified posture within NATO, because air-land battle was the threat to Russia, which made it realize that it could not risk an armored thrust into Germany. And so that doctrine countered, and we countered it with the use of weapon systems. So that's very important. What he asked is a very important question that needs to be developed by NATO. In regard to the U.S. election, I stand a lot of people here last night because I think that in general, the U.S. election is highly controversial, even among Americans themselves that follow this region of the world. I think Hillary Clinton is what Don Rumsfeld is referred to as a known. And he's described Trump as a known unknown. And so I think that in the U.S. election, it's very obvious that Hillary Clinton has a very articulated position and view on Eastern Europe, and we know what she's like, and we know that it's probably a very big win solution for Poland. Donald Trump is another kind of, is what Don Rumsfeld called an unknown. He's a known unknown. And so I think that in that aspect, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Trump and his views. And I think that if you look at the people that advise him, for example, Newt Gingrich, to be a vice presidential candidate, he's a friend of Poland, he's a friend of, his views on Putin are much different than anybody else. You look at Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, who in the presidential debates referred to Putin as a thug. These are the types of people that lead people that would be advising Trump if he was elected. And I think the elections are very far away. It still remains uncertain on how this may go in the United States. But I think that if you look at the people and the advisors, and you look at the fact that Trump is somebody that was friends with Misha Saakashvili, he invested in Georgia in 2008, he's going to build the Trump Towers. He is someone that has known this part of the world and is willing to invest in it, which is much different than, say, a presidential candidate that visited Poland as a part of a CODEL delegation. When someone's willing to invest their millions of dollars in this part of the world, that means they have to know something about it. I was asking my friends last night about the impact of Trump's wife being Slovenian, and asking what are Slovenians' views of Russians or the Serbs. And so Trump is someone that grew up, has German roots, also Scottish. I would say that his outlook on Europe would be much different than, say, President Obama's. So there's a lot of factors that are involved in this, and it's not just reading Putin or reading Trump in a way that he says things verbally in the press about Putin. One has to take a step back and understand that a candidate like Trump is much different than we've ever seen before. He is a businessman. So when he negotiates or talks about negotiating, he starts from a business perspective, not that of a politician. In other words, he starts off at the high position in order to get to the middle position in negotiations. So if you look at it from that perspective, then you might have a better ability to understand his perspectives, which I've spent a lot of time trying to understand myself, because I found the election, is like many Americans, quite intriguing right now. It's a very interesting presidential race and has great implications for NATO and the East. And by the way, Trump did say in the interview with the New York Times, he did say that he would defend Article 5. So he is on record as saying that. So, and I'm not defending Trump, I'm just pointing that out as a fact. So.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for making unpredictable more predictable. But I'm still concerned anyhow. But well, let's yield the floor to the public. I see Lieutenant Krzypa. Oh, sorry, Colonel. Of course, Colonel. Of course. Sorry.
I would like to explain something, because I think was misunderstanding between generals. And General Korea asked properly, was not mistaken by interpreter. It is de-escalation doctrine. I'm explaining for General Pledge. Where Russia has own rights to use nuclear weapon when they see that conventional war is beyond their capacity. And this was the question. It was not mistaken by interpreter. That such a doctrine, de-escalation, exists in Russia since 1999. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this update. Could I ask technicians to increase a bit the light? Czy mogę prosić o lekko rozjaśnienie publiczności, żebyśmy widzieli również osoby zadające pytania. Panie generale, czy chciałby Pan odnieść się do tego, co powiedział Pan pułkownik Krzywda? Że to faktycznie chodziło o deeskalację?
Tak, no w terminologii rosyjskiej oczywiście ta doktryna jest tak przez Rosjan nazywana jako deeskalacja nuklearna konfliktu konwencjonalnego. Ja zgadzam się z uwagą pana generała, że to jest termin nielogiczny, sam w sobie sprzeczny, ponieważ użycie broni nuklearnej, taktycznej nawet, tak jak Rosjanie to zakładają, użycie neutralne, to znaczy nie na żaden obiekt wojskowy, a już broń Panie Boże, nie na obiekt amerykański, czy francuski, czy brytyjski, czyli nie na obiekty państw nuklearnych, jeśli już to na jakiś obiekt, no na przykład polski, albo w ogóle neutralnie na Morzu Bałtyckim, albo w powietrzu. Chodzi o to, że Rosjanie zakładają, czy też sądzą, że takie pojedyncze uderzenie nuklearne, taktyczną bronią nuklearną, pokazanie, że oni są zdeterminowani przejścia do kolejnego etapu wojny, czyli wojny nuklearnej, że taki akt pozornego nawet, neutralnego wybuchu nuklearnego w czasie konfliktu konwencjonalnego mógłby wprowadzić w NATO zatrzymanie, czy zahamowanie, czy co najmniej konsternację, co dalej robić. Czy odpowiadać bronią nuklearną, tak jak nasza doktryna przewiduje, że każde użycie nuklearne wywoła zapewne odpowiedź w pełnym wymiarze, czy może nie. I Rosjanie kalkulują w tej swojej doktrynie, że to może być właśnie ten czynnik, który zatrzyma konflikt zbrojny w takiej fazie, jaki jest dla nich korzystny. Że oni przez zaskoczenie mogą uzyskać jakąś korzyść w tym konflikcie i aby zahamować reakcję NATO, na przykład no, zmasowane pójście z pomocą krajom bałtyckim wykonują takie pojedyncze uderzenia nuklearne. To jest kalkulacja rosyjska. Ja nie wiem, czy NATO ma dobrą odpowiedź na tego typu kalkulację rosyjską, czy ma odpowiedź wystarczającą, aby przekreślić te rosyjskie kalkulacje. Bo jeśli tego nasza z kolei doktryna, czy nasza polityka deklaracji nie będzie wiarygodna dla Rosjan, to będzie to oznaczało utrzymywanie się dużego ryzyka na możliwość zdecydowania się Rosji na taki ograniczony konflikt konwencjonalny pod parasolem właśnie tej jej doktryny taktycznego użycia jakiegoś pojedynczego wykonania uderzenia nuklearnego. W tym kontekście było moje pytanie, bo sądzę, że to jest problem otwarty i do dyskusji. A w tym całym systemie przeciwdziałania NATO, czy odpowiedzi, czy reakcji na tę właśnie kalkulację rosyjską, na tę doktrynę rosyjską, obrona przeciwrakietowa może spełniać pewną rolę w tej odpowiedzi.
Dziękuję Panie Generał. Thank you very much. I think that when we were talking about misleading definitions used by Russia, it recalls me the humanitarian convoys in Ukraine, and they are very humanitarian for sure. But I think we have a question from a friend.
It's actually a little bit interesting being to this conference here, having NATO ballistic missile defense discussion, and then compared to challenges from Russia, because the NATO ballistic missile defense has never been about Russia. It's actually been about being together with Russia, at least in the initial stage. It should be the glue who has to actually pat down the NATO-Russia cooperation, but then Lisbon is basically burned. And this system itself has never been, or do not have the capability to target any of the Russians' missile capabilities. As even phase 4 has been phased out, and Russia do not even recognize that. So the question is, should we have phase 4 back into the missile defense? And so the next step being doing the missile defense be 360, because right now it's about the southeast and not towards Russia. So it's discussion in missile defense and Russia is not within this decade. I would say it's far down the road. If we have NATO missile defense, should we turn about let's say the ICBM threats or even the medium range threats for Russia, because it's a completely different system we have today, and it's not designed to have a massive number of missiles taken out of the sky coming in over Europe. So we're talking 1, 2, 3 missiles maybe. That's it, because it's against terror and rogue states in the south. So this is I would say the level of threat, or the level of threat in Russia and NATO missile defense it doesn't compare quite a lot, right, as I see it.
So, if I understand correctly, if the fourth phase should return, and if the system should have 360 capabilities, okay, gentlemen, who would like to respond to it? I see General Blogger or General Riley.
Well, first of all, you are right that the system is not targeted. It's not an offensive system, obviously. So it only has capability if someone's trying to attack you. And so from that, we don't believe it would be threatening to anyone. On the other hand, the Phase 4 was originally designed to counter threat projections that Iran would be developing a long-range strategic system. And I believe there needs to be a response against long-range strategic systems when the threat becomes evident. And so if we see that, that is an option for not only the President of the United States, but NATO in total, because it's not only the United States, it's Canada. And strategic systems have the capability of very lofted trajectories, even to here in Europe, from a location, geographic location such as Iran. So as the threat materializes, and as it's seen, that type of testing, the one evident piece in all of this is it's very hard to simulate and to develop long-range strategic systems without an extensive amount of testing. So it would become very evident that if you were going to have to develop a system which you have confidence in. So if there was in fact strategic systems being developed around the world in places such as Iran, then there needs to be a response from a missile defense point of view. If you're going to have missile defense, it can't only be against intermediate, medium, and short range. It's either you have missile defense or you don't. And if you're going to have missile defense, and there is a threat and a concern about the intent to use that capability against you, then it would be logical that a phase 4 would come back. So I think it is driven primarily from the point of view of what is the intelligence and what's the interpretation of the threat. Now, to counter that, you do need a long lead time. If a threat emerges tomorrow and we see it being tested, tomorrow is too late in order to field that type of capability. And I will point out, being one of the architects, Phase 4 was in fact a capability that not only would be effective for Aegis ashore, such as a system being here in Poland, but also would be, by definition, would be a mobile system too, in order to intercept very early any long-range threats. So the Phase 4 capability has not been, by physical, technical means, has not been eliminated. I mean, there's always the option. It's a very adaptable architecture, including going back to a very long-range threat, if that in fact emerges and is seen.
Probably to add to the answer to your question, the situation since Lisbon has changed, that is true. But as far as I see, there is no consensus in NATO to develop a ballistic missile defense system against the longer ranging threat that is coming from a different direction. So the answer that NATO developed to deal with issues that come from the, let's say, change policies of Russia is a bolstering of the theater ballistic missile defense capabilities. What I said before in my initial statement. Theater ballistic missile defense is, let's say, the capability NATO needs to refer to when they call out the plans for the defense of the Baltic states, for the defense of Poland, the defense of Romania. That is the answer. And in that area, we lack lower layer capabilities, because only very few countries have enough capabilities to contribute to theater ballistic missile defense, and we need additional sensor capabilities so that the lower layer system capabilities can be used effectively.
Thank you very much. Other questions? I see our Pulaski expert on missiles.
Thank you. Maciej Pulaski Foundation. I have a question to General O'Reilly. Earlier in your statements, you said a lot about the importance of interoperability between the systems, between the sensors and the shooters. And recently, just as recently as yesterday, we've heard that our medium-range air defense system, Wisła, is taking shape again, and we might procure the one particular system. What is the MDA's or the U.S. expectation as far as the interoperability between Patriot batteries and THAAD batteries, and even higher tier defense? And when do you expect the IPCS and the MDS to be integrated in a common picture? And maybe one more question, how do you expect this could enhance the security of Poland? Thank you.
Well, as General Pfluger said, I think what's absolutely critical is we abide by the interoperability standards that NATO has set. By doing that, you automatically, as defense contractors, and that also includes the French CMT and other systems being developed, when those interoperability standards are met, the system by definition will be interoperable, including naval systems and land systems. Having been the program manager of Patriot and of THAAD and responsible for a large part of the development of the Aegis system, I know when we did a test, for example, in 2012, October 2012 in the Pacific, we actually integrated all three systems simultaneously, not only the shooting but also the sensing. against multiple threats in the air at one time in a live test. So I believe those tests are extremely important and need to continue with all of NATO's systems as we move forward. And I believe that testing in the Atlantic region is important also as a confidence building for exactly what you said, of the integration of all of the systems. So from a technical point of view, as long as all of the member nations ensure that their systems abide by the interoperability standards that have all been agreed to with NATO, we will in fact have highly integrated systems. The command and control needs to be extended to the fact to take into account all the different sensor systems that are out there. So there's always room for more adjustment there to get the maximum amount of capability from not only sensors in certain areas, but the redundancy is very important, and the robustness of it. As was previously said, the lower tier contribution is extremely important. And I concur with the comments that that is an area that must be extensively enhanced here in NATO. And all contributions to lower tier are extremely important. I think more important right now than an intermediate range capability to be added. And we are behind, from a NATO point of view, in looking at, again, the uncertainty of the threat over the next decade from a lower tier aspect. So the contribution made here in Poland, I believe, is extremely, extremely important.
Thank you very much. Some other question? Yes, here, I see. Mr. Przyklam.
Dzień dobry, Janusz Przyklam, CNS. Pytanie do pana profesora Kozieja. Panie profesorze, czy polska doktryna bierze pod uwagę jakikolwiek komponent morski w systemie obrony przeciwlotniczej?
No, już od roku tej doktryny nie kształtuje, także być może przez ten rok coś się zmieniło. Jeśli idzie o obronę powietrzną w ogóle, to ja osobiście uważam, że właśnie marynarka wojenna powinna być włączona w modernizację w tym obszarze zdolności obrony powietrznej. Jednym z kierunków wzmacniania potencjału tego rodzaju sił zbrojnych właśnie jest możliwość włączenia się w modernizację systemu obrony powietrznej.
Dziękuję. Well, some other questions? Yes.
Szymon Hatwas, National Defense University in Warsaw. I have a primary question with regard to continuation to my colleague. I would like to continue the questioning about sea-based platforms. And question to General Riley, do you think that the Polish Navy can bring some value in achieving some capabilities for PMD, for like let's say multi-purpose frigates with PMD capabilities? Do you think it's possible for Poland, at least with regard to sensors?
Yes.
Great.
To expound upon that, yes, I believe that it's not only, as I said, the depth of sensors, but the different locations. And being able to respond to a crisis or an escalating situation 10 years from now is very difficult to predict. And flexibility is necessary. I will point out in this discussion between land and sea base is very interesting discussions I was personally involved in 8-9 years ago with members of the U.S. Joint Staff from this whole discussion where it was considered by some preposterous to take a Navy Aegis system and put it on the ground. And I said, why not? And, so there, I believe the use of sensor systems, including Smart L and others that are you find on ships, the reduced logistics and the greater interoperability of sea-based and land-based, but physically moving them and exchanging them in that regard, I think makes a lot of sense. It allows us, again, to reduce the costs and to help the interoperability. So I really don't believe we should be blurring the line between naval-based and sea-based from the systems themselves. Sensors and command and control does have to take into account for that. But yes, I believe that's extremely important. And also different members of NATO operate in different parts of the world with different levels of perceived concern by countries in the area. And Poland operating in the Baltic Sea, for example, is a great example. Denmark, other Baltic countries operating up there is a way of enhancing our sensor capability without U.S. ships having to operate in those areas.
To add to that answer, just this year there has been an exercise west of Scotland called At Sea Demo, in which Aegis systems based on U.S. cruisers and destroyers were participating, as well as a Dutch frigate with a smart hull. And they demonstrated this successful handoff of a ballistic missile target from the smart hull to the Aegis system. So you can see that European navies can well contribute to the ballistic missile defense mission on the sensor side. The second point is, or the second question is, will the Europeans embark on a shooter-interceptor capability? I think that is a question that can be, let's say, postponed a bit, as we do not lack at the moment upper layer defensive systems. We lack in NATO lower layer defensive systems.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I think the question is for General Kleber. There is a question about German of acquiring meats and what can be the future of this German program.
I must confess that I am not the right person that can answer that question. The decision was taken to, let's say, follow the MEADS program. As far as I know, the MEADS program has milestones in the further development, because the MEADS is not yet a system that is ready to be procured. It needs further development, and the development steps include milestones, and if the milestones are not met, that, at least as I understood it, it could be lead to a termination of the program. The key point for me was that with German decision on MEADS, we are leaving the well-known and well-practiced Patriot family of Patriot users. We profited a lot, common logistics, interoperability, sharing the threat database, etc., etc. And we are spending quite a sum of money for less systems than we have at the moment on the Patriot side. And the missile anyhow is a missile, the interceptor, that will be provided by Lockheed Martin, be it a Patriot-based defense system, or be it a MEADS defense, MEADS-based ballistic missile defense. I can't tell you any more about it. That's how much I know about the MEADS decision. And I do know from my visit to the International Air Exhibition in Berlin that there are talks between the MEADS main contractors, MBDA and Lockheed Martin, with potential customers like Turkey and Poland.
Thank you very much. Another question? So I have one question to Glenn Howard. Glenn, you mentioned in one of your answers, made some reference to Belarus.
And there is information about re-establishing a military cooperation between the United States and Belarus. So let me broaden it a bit, maybe. Belarus and Ukraine versus NATO. How, from a strategy perspective, these countries matters for our security? Because recently we had, for instance, Anaconda exercise in Poland, and among participating countries there were also Ukrainian soldiers. Can you imagine having Belarusian soldiers at such exercise? And what consequences it might have for both security of NATO, cooperation of NATO countries with Russia? What will be the reaction of Russia in that case? Because it means something that our Minister of Foreign Affairs travels to Minsk. Now I hear about military cooperation between the United States and Belarus. Something is happening. Now, from time to time, we hear that after NATO summit there might be a Russia-NATO Council meeting. On one side, we are talking today about the potential threat from Russia. On another hand, we are re-establishing military cooperation with Belarus. Belarus is an ally to Russia. What is happening and what it means?
Well, I think that, first of all, people in the Pentagon finally woke up and started looking at maps. And they finally realized that Belarus is also adjoining, plays a very important role in the Baltic. And too long, for the past, since 2010, policymakers have only looked at Belarus in terms of sanctions and human rights violations. And they failed to look at the new strategic reality of what Belarus is. A good friend of mine from Latvia told me that there's two countries that matter most to Baltic security. The first country is Finland and the second is Belarus. So anytime you look at a map, you can determine that Belarus plays a very important geopolitical role for the defense of this area. It cannot, from our perspective, if Belarus is probably the best ally of NATO if it only remains neutral and free of Russian ground troops. Now, yes, Belarus is a union state with Russia, and there's defense cooperation between them. But Belarus, the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, did say that Belarus would not be an invasion corridor to Ukraine. And that's a very important statement to make. It's also important that Belarus played a very important role with the Minsk Accord in the agreement between Russia and Ukraine on Donbass. So there is a very important role that Belarus can play, and I think it's starting to change in the way that we geopolitically look at its role, primarily because the issue of sanctions has so long dominated our perspectives. There is no U.S. ambassador in Belarus, unfortunately, and so there's a new effort underway to reestablish mil-to-mil relations with Belarus, and Belarus is responding, and I think that's very important. And this is a part of the new geopolitical climate, I think, caused by Donbass and Ukraine, in which we look to NATO, we look to Belarus as a way, because we don't want Belarus to become a staging area for operations into the Baltic. I think, as I remind my Lithuanian friends, that the capital Vilnius is 30 kilometers from the Belarus border. So if the Tamanska Division is suddenly relocated into Belarus, our ability for early warning is very limited, and it creates a lot of strategic problems as well as panic in Vilnius. But I think earlier this year, President Lukashenko made a very important statement when he decided that Belarus would not be the home to a new Russian air base. I think this is important strategically because anytime you're looking at NATO policing action in the Baltic, our reaction time, if there's a base in Belarus, goes from 11 minutes to 4 minutes. And as you know, trying to put planes in the air to respond to Russian aircraft is the time factor is critical. It's critical in a variety of ways. So this is the type of decision that was made by the president of Belarus. And there is a game that's going on. I don't deny that. Belarus is in a very delicate economic position between the East and West. That's why it's in our strategic priorities, Belarus should become a neutral, non-aligned country, and in the same way that Belarus, in the way that Serbia has very good mil-to-mil relations with the United States, actually participates with the United States in overseas operations in Africa, I think the vision that's coming out of the Pentagon now in terms of Belarus is that one that it can become a partner in overseas United Nations operations and try to interact with the Belarus military so that it becomes less dependent on Moscow, becomes more interacting with the West, and so that it doesn't become a platform for invasion against either the Baltic, and that's what we want, and that's the strategic kind of perspective on it.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Glenn, for this side topic, but I thought it important because it is, we can say, happening right now. My last question to our panelists is about NATO management, or actually political command. As Ambassador Fishbowl is ending his term, and we already know who will be replacing him as Deputy Secretary General of NATO, it will be Rolf Miller, who was, I think she still is, the Undersecretary for Disarmament and negotiations with Russia. And that's her portfolio and that's her experience. Why she? Does it mean something? It has any specific meaning that she had experience dealing with Russia, disarmament, I don't know, the escalation. Is it how you gentlemen would interpret it?
Are you saying that's a signal?
I'm asking. I'm curious. I would like to know.
Well, the fact that it remains American is still significant.
Do you have an opinion about it?
I think, like Vershbow, before a Deputy Secretary General who knows the Russians, who knows how they act, how they think, how they negotiate from own experience is very important. It doesn't matter which topic, let's say, the main theme of the negotiation was, it is important that she knows how the Russians think and act. And Vershbow had the same experience. And I think that is most important. And of course, the Deputy Secretary always is an American. It is a quota position, whereas the Secretary always is a European.
Any other comments?
She only has 6 months.
That's
until November.
Yeah, that's another thing. So, gentlemen, as we are about to approach break, I would like to ask you about one final sentence, and please be positive. How we can settle with Russia? How we can de-escalate this situation that we are having today? Because some of us are visiting Baltic states, and we know that they are really afraid about their security. Maybe in Poland we are more immunized by history and more calm. But what we can do to provide some security for children and have good relations, partnership relations, whatever, but predictable and stable relations with Russia. And advice, please be positive. I have answered. Maybe.
No, zaczynam. No to jest takie pytanie o życie po szczycie. O życie po szczycie NATO. Dzisiaj żyjemy w przededniu szczytu natowskiego, ale rzeczywiście chyba już musimy rozmawiać o tym, co będzie po szczycie. To, co na szczycie, w istocie rzeczy już wszyscy wiemy. A to życie polityczno-strategiczne, życie po szczycie będzie moim zdaniem niestety nową zimną wojną. Będzie hybrydową zimną wojną w relacjach.
Panie ministrze, miał być pozytywny.
No, postaram się, może coś. Zimna wojna, nawiasem mówiąc, zakończyła się jakoś tak optymistycznie, prawda? Więc może i ta, w którą niestety wstępujemy, moim zdaniem, w mojej ocenie, zakończył się ten okres już pozimnowojenny w stosunkach Zachodu z Rosją i zaczyna się coś, co pewnie można określić tą hybrydową zimną wojną niestety, to znaczy konfrontacja polityczna Rosja-Zachód z wykorzystaniem różnych argumentów. Bo zapewne na ten szczyt Rosja znowu, jak to ona mówi swoim językiem, adekwatnie odpowie, czyli nie spasuje, nie obniży tego napięcia, wręcz przeciwnie, będzie i w narracji, i być może w jakichś praktycznych działaniach to napięcie wzrastało. Co jest istotne moim zdaniem ze strony NATO, aby te warunki neozimnowojenne jednak no, jakoś optymistycznie do nich można było podchodzić. To są te dwa elementy. Ja myślę, że NATO słusznie przyjmuje obecnie taką doktrynę, bym powiedział, dwutorowego podejścia do Rosji. Z jednej strony powstrzymywanie, mitygowanie Rosji poprzez utrzymywanie koniecznych zdolności obronnych, demonstrowanie determinacji i jedności NATO, a z drugiej strony dialog z Rosją, szukanie sposobów, jeśli nie obniżenia tego napięcia szybko, to bym powiedział ucywilizowania tych stosunków neozimnowojennych. Podobnie zresztą jak było w końcowym okresie tej klasycznej zimnej wojny, kiedy Zachód i obydwa bloki ówczesne wypracowały jednak pewne mechanizmy przejrzystości w swoich stosunkach, minimalizowania napięcia, budowy środków zaufania. Więc tu może to pytanie o tę personalną decyzję na stanowisku zastępcy sekretarza generalnego być może właśnie też można jakoś tak powiązać.
I tu postawmy pozytywną kropkę.
Okej, no dobrze.
Bo miał być krótkie i pozytywne, więc chociaż pozytywnie. Dziękuję, panie ministrze.
Yeah, I wanted to say that basically the United States has to figure out whether we're rediscovering the concept of deterrence. This has been a long lost concept in Washington that since the end of the Berlin Wall, the idea of reset relations with Russia, cooperation, this has dominated American thinking since the end of the Cold War. And the idea of deterrence in a new generation of young people and policymakers is something they're rediscovering in Washington. And the deterrence has to be with a capital D. It can't be with a small d. And by that I mean, on June 6th, an American diplomat was beaten up outside of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. This was unprecedented. I've talked to American diplomats that were based in Moscow in the Cold War. I myself, I was in Moscow from 84 to 86 as a translator working, and this is really unprecedented. And yet this incident was kept from the public, was not talked about. And at the same time, the United States is wanting to engage in intelligence sharing with Russia over Syria. But at the same time, we're appearing here in Warsaw talking about reinforcing the eastern flank. So the United States really has to make up its mind what it wants to do with Russia and whether it wants to continue some type of dialogue or whether it really wants to be engaged in deterrence. And that is a very important question to ask at this very important critical juncture for the NATO alliance. And it's very important now. And now we have this idea of A2AT, anti-access air denial with Kaliningrad and the threat of nuclear de-escalation. And we have to figure out what type of strategies and policies we want. But I can tell you one thing, that any type of strategy we have to have can no longer be reacting to events. The United States has to be very proactive in this region. We have to think of new strategies when it comes to A2AD warfare. We're doing that now as we're changing the strategy. We now have a joint nation hosting basing agreement with Sweden. This is very unprecedented. A strategy starting to develop. And we need to think about new strategies, whether to get places like Denmark and the island of Bornholm, deploying Patriot missiles to Bornholm on a temporary basis as a way to cause the Russians to be off balance in their strategy. As General Kozej just said, you know, nuclear de-escalation is very important, but also this strategy by Russia is born, it comes out of demographic weakness. This is not the Soviet Union we're dealing with. This is Russia. This is Putin playing with he's playing poker with us. As Bob Gates has said, he's playing a poker hand that is very bad right now, but he's playing it very good. And this is our problem. And I'll end on that note.
Thank you very much for this hazardous comment. Well, I would say most moderately positive. Thank you. General.
From a positive point of view, that's challenging. But my personal dealings with the Russians for several decades many decades, is they're very pragmatic. And they respond to actions much more than words. And so, as was said here, demonstrated resolve, increase in resolve that this is not, intimidation of NATO is not tolerated. At the same time, there are common threats to both NATO and Russia, which are emerging continuously and grow worse every day. And so there are still opportunities, and there has been in the past, very positive, cooperative military and diplomatic actions, many examples over the decades with NATO and Russia working together. And I think those opportunities in other regions ought to be used as in parallel as confidence building and changing the direction. But I believe their enthusiasm to do that will be directly proportional to the resolve that is actually shown here, again, through demonstrations, military exercises, NATO joint, integrated with diplomatic efforts here in Europe, and including in the Baltic Sea, is necessary in order to convince them from a pragmatic point of view that this is very expensive for them to continue to prosecute this strategy and is not very effective. Until then, there'll be little motivation to stop doing what they're doing now.
Thank you very much for this very practical recommendation.
Try to be very brief. I think we could go back to a policy which was invented in NATO at Reykjavik quite a few years ago. We could call it the dual track approach. We could call it the stick and carrot method. NATO will definitely show its resolve and firmness here at this summit. NATO has adapted to the new security environment. A division between East and West, North and South in NATO is not possible. NATO stands united. The US commitment is firm. The European allies start reinvesting into defense, etc. All those messages from Warsaw will show Russia that NATO is firm, cannot be divided. And on the other hand, there should be the offer of NATO of cooperation, because there are so many issues in this world we cannot solve without Russia. So the offer to cooperate with the Russians is still on the table, and that's what I would call, let's say, more or less the reinvention of the dual track policy. Stick and carrot, defense and cooperation.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you very much, wonderful speakers, and I hope that you will join me in saying thank you to our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for participating and contributing to this panel. I invite you for a coffee break and have a good time.
I learned a lot.